So today it's very important. It's the start of Mental Health Awareness Week, and it's very important as it raises the awareness to everyone on so many areas within mental health, especially important during these challenging times during lockdown for people personally and within their businesses. So for that reason, we've teamed up with our colleagues at Doncaster and Sheffield Chamber and in partnership with our patrons, Westfield Health, who will bring you this morning's webinar. So we're going to be covering a number of topics through an engaging Q&A with Westfield's Director of Wellbeing, Richard Holmes. Morning, Richard.
Morning, everyone.
So Richard's a health and wellbeing expert who has dedicated his career to improving people's quality of life. He's passionate about the impact of health and wellbeing on business and individual performance. So for everyone joining us this morning, please feel free to raise your digital hand and also type your questions into the chat function where Sam will keep an eye on that and ask any probing questions that you guys have asked to Richard. We want this to be engaging as possible, so we welcome your questions and also your interaction, so thank you. To start the conversation, I want to open up with this question, Richard. What would you say is the biggest challenge people are facing right now?
Okay, Shane, I think everybody will immediately recognise this in themselves. If you all think about what's the biggest challenge you all face now individually, and I think that's adapting to what everyone's now. I think it's become quite boring, hasn't it? The phrase "the new normal," and the key challenge in terms of that adaptation will be different for different groups of people. So for those of us that are on furlough, it might be sort of loss of purpose, because we know work is really, really important to people's mental health and well-being in terms of giving them purpose in the day. For the others, the key challenge will be isolation. And we mustn't forget key workers, people that are working from home. Actually, overwork is likely to be one of the biggest challenges they're facing in dealing with this new normal. We used to do a lot of work with supporting and training people to work from home before this situation began. In fact, before the situation began, there were about 4 million home workers. Now they reckon it's closer to 16, 17 million. And that creates we know that people, when you first work from home, you actually tend to overwork because you don't have a schedule that you work to like you do when you're at work. So you don't tend to take breaks, you tend to do more than you normally would. And there's also a bit of a psychological pressure, I think, on all of us when we're working from home in terms of proving that we're actually working. That was certainly the case before this situation. But so there's lots of different challenges adapting to the new normal for a lot of different people in different areas. But I think what's common to us all is just the not knowing, and trying to create new purposeful daily schedules that allow us to cope that bit better with the challenges that we face.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. You've mentioned there about people who are on furlough and also people who aren't on furlough. And I've got a question that I'll come back to later on around kind of morale within businesses, because I think that's a key area, to be honest with you, but I'll come back to that. Okay,
because I've done a lot of these employer forums, Shane, and that actually is something we'll bring up later, because there's different dynamics in different firms in terms of what fellow workers feel and what, importantly, people that are still working feel.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So going back to the challenges, based on these challenges, how best can HR professionals, leaders, managers within businesses support their people?
Well, I think everybody on this call at the moment would classify themselves as a leader in some respect or other. I think the biggest challenge we've got all as leaders is humans being humans. Our nature is that we like things to be consistent and predictable in our lives. And doing the number of forums that I've been attending, a lot of what HR professionals, business leaders are talking about is that they're saying that the people above all want clear communication about what's happening next and what they can expect moving forward. Quite often, though, the answer we've got is we don't know. But I think one of the key important things in terms of supporting people in terms of this times of uncertainty is actually being honest with them. Is don't try to avoid the question or try and make up something. people do appreciate the fact that you're honest and just say, look, I don't know, but this is what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks. So if we give them some clear guidance as what we do know for the next week or the next 2 weeks, that's all we can do at the moment. And most people appreciate that. And we also have to appreciate, a bit like we were talking about before, that that's going to be different for different groups of workers. So key workers, home workers, furloughed workers, they're all going to have different needs and concerns about what we as leaders are going to be telling them about what they should expect to be happening in the future. And again, those messages will need to be different for each of those key workers, but they'll need to be honest and upfront about, it may only be short term, it may only be next week that we can tell them. But at least if we can give them a degree of comfort about what's going to happen in the next 7 days, then we can just keep going back with that message every so often.
Brilliant. So narrowing this down, in terms of the challenges you've mentioned and some of the solutions, what would be your top 3 tips right now for businesses to support their staff? Before you answer that, Richard, we have got a number of questions as well already that Sam's going to come to at the end of this question, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, I think actually rather than 3, there's probably 4. Let me do the first 3 first. Is what I was just referring to before, communication, as clear and as unambiguous as you can possibly make it. That's what people need from our leadership at the moment. And that leadership, number 2, needs to be strong. We need to be strong in terms of being able to let people know what we do know and what we don't know, and comfort them in that respect. And in doing that, I think we also need to be perhaps more compassionate than we've been in the past. I don't mean by being completely overly soppy and super comfortable with people, but just bearing in mind what we have to say to people is going to be interpreted by people differently if we're not careful that what we say is as clear as unambiguous as possible. So they would be the top 3 things for me: communication, leadership. Sorry, the third bit was what support we provide for people, both practical support, and now we've started to move away from practical support in terms of home working, surviving furlough, to practical support in terms of, for those that can, returning to work. Whether that's people that have been working from home coming back to the workplace, or whether it's people that have been on furlough coming back to working home. Okay. As well as practical support, we can provide wellbeing support. This week, amongst all others, is going to sort of highlight the need for us to we've now got a duty of care to look after people's wellbeing. So what wellbeing support can you provide? Not only mental, but physical, because we know that our physical resilience and health supports and underpins our mental well-being. And I think the 4th bit that I'd add in, the 4th tip, which links to that, is everybody on this call, what are you doing to look after yourself first and foremost? Because if you're not fit and resilient yourself, you're not much good to the people that you're trying to support. So in order to be able to support your people to the best of your ability, you yourself have got to be in the best frame of mind and the best health that you possibly can be.
Brilliant.
I hope that makes sense to people.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely relates in so many different areas. So thank you. Sam, do you want to come in?
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Morning, Richard.
Morning.
Just a quick question from me. If this is the new normal and people are going to be working from home for many months, which it looks like we will be, is it your employer's responsibility to ensure that you're properly set up, you've got a proper workplace set up from home? I mean, in terms of, proper desks and chairs and things like that, repetitive strain injury, and all that responsibility does that lie with?
This came up on a call on Friday, actually, and just so I preface this answer, because I was doing it with a lawyer. So I'm not a lawyer. Neither am I a clinician. From a wellbeing perspective, we come from an educational background, but I can tell everybody that as employers, you have a duty of care to people's health and safety. And that duty of care extends to wherever you require or expect people to work. So if you've got people working from home, yes, you have a duty of care to ensure that their workstations, for want of a better phrase, are fit for purpose and healthy and safe. I think, how do you go about doing that? Well, we are going to be doing this for much longer. So in the past few weeks, we've probably not paid that much attention to checking whether people have reasonable workstations at home. But if we're going to go for longer, then people are going to have to stop sitting on the settee, for example, and working on the laptop. You're going to need a reasonable workstation to work from. Now, again, we're not going to be able, we as employers can advise our employees on what that should be. We're not in a position at the moment to go out visiting people to do checks and make sure that their workplaces are appropriate. But what we can do is we can send people out guidance as to what they should have in place to be able to work effectively and safely. I know, for example, one of the guides that Westfield has produced, a free guide, which is home working, actually has some of that guidance in it. So you can pick Beth Neal, who's on the call, we'll probably put in the chat function, the westfieldhealth.com/COVID-19 link that takes you to those free advice documents. But it's certainly something we have a duty of care of, and we're going to have to start paying attention to now. We know it's going to be going on longer than perhaps we originally thought.
Brilliant. Sam, did you have any more, or are you happy with that? Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Richard. It'd be great if we could share that link, the useful document. I spotted Jenny's chair. You see, Jenny looks like she's got her a proper workplace chair there, whereas I'm on my wooden chair at my kitchen table. So
yeah, and Sam, Claire Watmore's just sent in a thing a comment in chat saying that they've just sent a survey out to their teams to help them assess and plan for the future too. So again, people on the call, if you've done certain things in relation to this, if you just add those as comments, then it helps advise other people about best practice, what you're doing. And I guess if you feel comfortable supporting others, again, on the chat function, let people know that you've done certain things and you're happy to pass on and share that knowledge to others.
That was my next part, Richard, really. I was going to open it up to the group, and I'm glad Claire's come there to open it up, really. In terms of, does anybody relate to this and want to come in and talk about what they're doing in their businesses to support their employees, whether it's different kit working from home, whether it's additional support on areas that Richard's covered? Would anyone like to come in? You can raise your digital hand, or you can type it in the chat function. That's no problem. We can pick it up as we go.
Shane, while you're waiting for people, Jessica brought up a comment there saying that their place, that they're actually now looking at permanently moving people to home, and after this situation, that'll stay the norm. There's an awful lot of organisations that are actually doing that, and the likelihood is we'll find that, if you like, the occupancy levels of offices and workplaces in the future will be a lot smaller than they were beforehand. I know my team, my management team that runs the Wellbeing business in Westfield Health, they're actually saying they live around the UK because we operate across the UK. We used to come into Sheffield once a month, and they're all saying, we're not going to do that again, are we? You know, this works so well with Zoom. We're not having to travel. We haven't got the cost of hotels and this type of thing. Can we continue to manage our business this way? So we won't do it every single month, but the majority of months we'll work now much more remotely than we were before.
Brilliant, thanks, Richard. And we've got Sam and we've got Andrew. So I'll come to Andrew first, who's got his hand raised. Andrew?
Thanks, Shane. It's not really a question so much as a comment, Richard. You started off talking about leadership at the start of your opening comments there, which I suppose where we're coming from, it's about managing people and managing, certainly at the moment, people's expectations of, where they expect things to pan out. Just talking about the impact of the furlough scheme, which people now refer to it as the furlough scheme. It's actually the job retention scheme, which I know it's a play on words, but it does give a slightly different spin on it. like everybody possibly on this call, or certainly a number of people on this call, we've got staff who are on the furlough scheme. We have a small number of staff, 14 in total, 6 of whom have been furloughed since Easter. And given the announcement that was made last week, that's potentially going to run up to the end of July and beyond, although it may be slightly more flexible after July. You're talking about a period there of 3.5 months of being out of the loop, as it were, out of work. And I suppose the issue from their point of view is how we manage that reintegration as and when it comes. Do we look at some kind of staggered approach? And then I suppose the longer it goes on, but the concerns they will have as individuals about the reality of potential redundancies. People will think that, even though you will try and give them as much, encouragement that that's not something certainly we would be looking at this stage. But the longer it goes on, people will get more anxious. And then the other bit, just a final comment, we've also not got to lose sight of those who remain at work and might also start beginning to have that view that they're the ones that are, if you like, taking the burden at work, whilst the other lot are all sat at home doing nothing. What are you going to do for me after all this is finished? Well, what I'm going to do for you is say thank you very much, and you've still got a job. But, I think you've got to get into people's minds and people's aspirations and indeed expectations of the outcome of this as well.
Points well made, Andrew. Yeah, there's going to be one of the biggest challenges I think we're all going to have is reintegrating people that have been on furlough, both from a social perspective, but there'll be quite a bit of retraining. People have forgotten how to do things if they've been out for 3 months or longer. So there's going to have to be some patience in almost refamiliarizing people with their roles when they come back online, and also allowing them appropriate time to catch up on where the business is and where their role is within that business.
Brilliant. Yeah, over to Sam. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, no, so just before I come to one of the questions I've got from one of the participants, just to add to Andrew's point, Richard, you've still obviously got a responsibility as an employer to be managing your employees' mental health, even for the staff that are on furlough. Is that right? You should be keeping tabs on these staff that are...
Absolutely. People on the job retention scheme, as Andrew rightly points out, it's that phrase. People are on furlough so that we can retain them as employees. Therefore, they are still employees, and we still have a duty of care to look after them in all aspects of employment, specifically, as you've rightly highlighted, the mental well-being.
And so, how would you do that? Would you integrate those people on furlough into team meetings? Would you be just...
Legally, if I'm correct, and I'm not sort of an HR professional in this respect, but to be furloughed on the job retention scheme means that you should not be asking those people to contribute into work in a commercial sense that supports commercial areas. However, there's a lot of very imaginative things organisations are doing to create, if you like, rather than work-based interaction, social interaction. Whether that's things like pub quizzes, those types of things, so that people on furlough can interact in a social environment with their colleagues that are still working.
Well, all right, thanks. I'll get to the questions now then. One of the participants asks, there's 2 parts to this question, Richard. As the lockdown eases, how important is flexibility in the future? And any suggestions on how to encourage staff to come back to the office, but also be sympathetic to individual concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think flexibility is going to be absolutely key to the future. Part of the job retention scheme that's been suggested that will change from August onwards is not only the contributions that government and the employer need to make, but the fact that they may allow people to come back in part-time capacity. And I think it's one a lot of organisations have been calling out for almost right from the beginning of this exercise. I know I've got half my management team are on furlough. Actually, at this point in time, I could. Wearing gloves or a mask. Sorry, Maxine.
Sorry about that, guys. Go on, Richard.
Okay. And what I was going to say is, in the ideal world, I'd be able to bring one or two of those back now, but in a part-time capacity. So, but I can't do that yet. So that will all add into this whole flexibility mix. In terms of encouraging people back to work, obviously at this point in time, we're being asked only to go back to the workplace if it's absolutely essential, that because we can only do our job at the workplace. When we get to the phase where we're asking people to come back who don't actually need to be in the workplace to work, that's going to be that sensitive time that you're talking about. It will be down to each individual organisation how they do that. I think we're going to need to recognise from a duty care point of view that there'll be some people really keen to come back, some people not keen, some people actually frightened about coming back. So part of that encouragement will be making sure that we've got in place all the things that we need in place to give the sort of, if you like, the mental reassurance certain people may need. And I think the other thing we've got to be careful of is those that are really, really keen to get back into the workplace and would come back now, that we actually almost be careful to that they don't rush back too quick. And again, part of our duty of care is to manage that inflow of workers back to the workplace in a sensible and phased manner.
Thanks, Shane. I'm back to you.
Mandela, you've raised your digital hand. I'm just going to unmute you, and do you want to just pick up on the area that you want to talk about?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Richard, thank you for your introduction there. And I just wanted to, it's not really, probably it's a question, but also a comment, really in terms of the job retention scheme. My job, we haven't had to use it. I work in the NHS as a medical doctor, but my other work involves working with charity as a church, and it's there that I wanted to talk about, where you have people that are put on furlough, and because they're put on furlough, they're not even allowed to do the normal things that they used to do. However, the staff that are running or holding the fort are doing all the work on their behalf. Now, when we come to reintegrating them, the danger I see is the emotions from those who held the fort for so long, and having colleagues come back and feeling that maybe they didn't do as much as they did, though they were receiving the pay. Would you say that that could be a bigger problem as well? I know the problem will be the staff that have been furloughed would have problems reintegrating, but again, it is the ones that have held the fort, feeling that they've done everything and yet their friends haven't been. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Mandela, and something I think that Shane was indicating he was going to bring up later. So perhaps we'll deal with it now, Shane. Is if we're not, we've got to be very careful that we do this in a balanced way. In the tendency is to focus on the needs of the people on furlough, but actually equally we've got to focus on the needs of the people that actually, as you say, still in work and holding the fort. And we've got to recognise that there's going to be dynamics between those two groups in terms of the people that are still at work saying, well, hang on, I've got paid on. It may be I'm getting paid exactly the same as the person that's been on furlough, but I'm doing all the work and they're not. I think it's something as leaders we've just got to recognise that dynamic's going to be there. Perhaps we need to sort of be able to talk to the people that are still at work and explain why they're there, the importance of them being there and why that's so integral to the business, as opposed to them being on furlough. I do know there are certain organisations now that are seeing that this is extending, as saying that people with the same role, they're not job share, but they, if you like, it's two people doing the same thing, is where they're actually sharing furlough. So one of them will work for 3 weeks while the other one's furloughed for 3 weeks, and then they'll switch over. So there are organisations doing that to try and share out the burden. But we do know as well there's going to be certain workers who haven't been furloughed because of their role, and that there aren't other employees that necessarily can cover their role. So they're going to be stuck. It's just something we're going to have to manage. I think we're just going to have to be open and honest about it. And I think most people that are currently working will appreciate and accept that. And perhaps we've got to think a bit more here and now today about what we're doing just to keep thanking them, and appreciating them rather than taking them for granted, and or shall we say, making sure that they don't get an impression that they're being taken for granted.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Mandela, for your point, and thank you, Richard. I'm going to come to Mike Lawrence first, who raised his hand, and then I'll come to Sam, if that's okay.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and good morning, Richard. Some fantastic points that you sort of like raised. One of the things that I just wanted to pick up on was you mentioned around managers, organisations need to be a little bit more compassionate than they've been in the past. Now, prior to setting up my own business and doing work, obviously, with Westfield Health and delivering the stuff on your behalf around the country, you find that a lot of managers, there's a certain specific culture, and sometimes those cultures or organisations being quite toxic. And how do you think they're going to kind of balance? This is like a balancing act which will need to go on when they go back, and hopefully people will go to back, because some organisations that might have been struggling or even struggling more, so they might want to look at reducing their overheads, making people redundant. Obviously sales have been sort of down, and might look to sort of increase the sort of targets of the people who are sort of like who are still left or have got this sort of like job. So how would you foresee this sort of role sort of, or this environment sort of like playing out in relation to organisations being sort of compassionate?
Yeah, I think we all recognise that we probably all represent different organisations with different, if you like, cultural attitudes to performance and how we deal with people. We have to keep in mind, we are in business, so we have to keep in mind that first and foremost, we have to keep the business running. That might mean that we have to take some difficult decisions. But that doesn't mean that those decisions aren't taken with empathy, care, and consideration. One of the things that Which is currently doing now is working on a whole area of coaching topics to support organisations in returning back to work. So, Mike, you'll be aware of these that you've done with us in the past. But part of that is for the employees, but part of it is, if you like, health leadership training for managers and coaching for managers in terms of supporting them in supporting their teams to come back to work and how they do it. So I think we should be giving some thought to, rather than just assuming managers will do things as they do, is we may need to give some thought as to whether we need to provide some additional coaching and support to managers to help them bring their teams back with the right sort of culture and attitude that's supportive.
Brilliant. And Sam, I'm not putting you to the back of the list. I really apologise, but Deborah, who's not spoke yet, has raised her hand, so I'm just going to go to Deborah first. Apologies, Sam.
Sorry, just trying to get unmuted there. Thank you. It's all right. I could have waited for Sam. I just had a question for Westfield Health, really. I'm a holistic therapist, so I have clients who come to me who have Westfield policies, they have reflexology or aromatherapy coverage on their policy. Will Westfield Health cover distance appointments? So like I'm offering hand reflexology one-on-one sessions with clients at the moment, and I'm still doing, because I'm a clinical aromatherapist, I'm doing aromatherapy consultations by phone or video, and then posting out inhalers and products blended with the aromatherapy for clients to use for pain, sleep, discomfort, stress while they're at home. Will those still be covered by Westfield Health? Can my clients still claim those, or can't they because I'm not face to face with them?
Okay, Deborah. Well, I'm not sure is the answer. If I'm, again, following my own advice, be honest. I look after the wellbeing side of the business rather than the insurance side of the business, which this would fall under. Siobhan, who's on the call, looks after this group of chambers in terms of the Westfield Health cash plan. Oh, sorry, Bethany. Bethany's just made contact with you, Deborah, via chat. So if you contact each other after this call, and then Bethany will look into that and sort it out.
I'm just obviously thinking of, you know, people who are working from home,
Yeah,
you know, still being able to get the support and well-being support that, you know, they've been used to being able to get.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very good point, Deborah, because there is actually a Chamber Westfield plan which the chambers have got with Westfield Health. So it's a very good point. I know there's a number of people that I know from our chamber who've actually got that plan. So it's a good point. So thank you for that, Deborah. I'm going to now come to Sam.
Thank you. Richard, just want to get your perspective on something really. I know there's probably not an answer for it, but obviously us, like many businesses, have had to furlough some members of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and continue with bare minimum really. And now the conversations arose around annual leave. Those that are still working have got, you know, stacks and stacks of annual leave, and obviously conscious that we don't want staff to burn out, given that they might have worked every day from, well, January to perhaps when the rest of the team come back in September. How do you find a balance? Do you rotate the furlough scheme to try and get people off, or what's your suggestion?
Well, people still in work are still entitled to holiday, or should we rephrase that to time off work, which is what holiday entitlement originally was. We tend to, when we talk about having holiday from work, we also tend to think about that as actually a holiday going away, but that's not possible. So yeah, we in Westfield, we have people that are now, we're taking days off as part of our holiday entitlement, just to get that rest and recovery, which is what holiday entitlement was originally entitled to do. So if we go back, for example, one of the earliest parts of health and safety legislation in terms of employment contracts was the requirement for an employer to provide both time off work in terms of holidays, but also breaks during the day so people can recover appropriately from and not overwork. So people working, you can take time off. Now, one of the things that the government's done is also, or will be doing in terms of employment regulations, is when normally we'd say you've got to take your holiday within a set period of time, a holiday year. I know that the likelihood is that's going to be extended. So part of the employment regulations may change to say that, you know, any holiday type people build up now, if they don't take it, they will now be allowed to do that over an extended period of time beyond the normal year thing. But it's important that we do encourage people who are still working to have some appropriate time off to rest and recover. Now, each employer might do this slightly differently, and it might come back again to how you are seen to be supporting the people that are still working. It may be you give people days off that are still working as almost like a reward, and you don't count it as part of the holiday entitlement they have carrying forward. At Westfield, when we had the last bank holiday on the Friday for VE Day, we then had a company holiday on the Monday for all those people that were still working, so they could have an extended break to rest and recover. So I think there's lots of things you can do
that as well.
Yeah. So there's lots of things you can do as an individual organisation in terms of how you treat or deal with people having days off or weeks off recognizing it's difficult for those that are still at work. We're all on skeleton crews, as they say. So sometimes it can be difficult for people to have time off, but if they're still working, you still have a duty of care to allow them appropriate holiday leave at the appropriate times.
Thanks, Richard.
I'm going to carry on the staff morale in just a second and come back to the original point, but I've just got a question, Richard. So personal feelings, we're clouding many judgments and decisions personally and in business. So how can we manage our personal feelings? Because a lot of them will be towards the not knowing what is normal with what's going on with furlough staff, with their employees who aren't furloughed. So how can we manage our personal feelings a little bit better so we make the right judgment rather than the wrong judgment?
Yeah, and I think if the easiest way to explain this is or to talk about this is everybody on the call just think about themselves individually rather than the workforce, and then take that thought process as to how you deal with employees. Yeah, dealing with uncertainty is the big thing now, isn't it, for all of us? And humans being humans, when things are uncertain, we start to have concerns, worries, anxieties about what may or may not happen. And the simplest way to look at anxiety is it's depending upon the strength of it, it's a concern or worry or something more extreme about what might happen in the future, whether that's in the next 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. It's a concern about what's going to happen. Although anxiety can also be reflected backwards in terms of what's already gone and how you've dealt with it and whether you've dealt with it properly. When we look at people, and Mike will be able to comment on this as well, when we look at people that are considered to be more resilient to anxiety, worries and pressures, we tend to find that they have a trait where they focus on the things that they can control. So first and foremost, that means they accept that there are things that are beyond their control. Now, sometimes there's a myth that more resilient people have this glib attitude about things they can't control, which is, well, if I can't control it, why worry about it? Yeah, that's not what they're actually thinking. What they're thinking and the way they're processing it mentally, and you can be, everybody on this call can be doing this now, is if there's something out of control, well, rather than use up negative energy worrying about it, more resilient people then start to use that energy more positively in terms of, well, what can I actually do that might influence that thing that I can't control a little bit better for me? And as soon as you start to think in that more positive mindset about how to influence things, accepting that there are certain things that you can't change, but you may be able to influence them, then suddenly that weight of anxiety on your shoulders starts to lift a little bit. So that's, for me, that's the key way of looking at it, is how you're reframing situations, accepting that the things you can't do, but also appreciating that, you know, even if I can't influence this thing that's going to happen that I can't control, actually thinking forward and saying, well, what's going to be the result of those things that I can't control? Right, how can I prepare myself to be in the best position to cope with those things? Does that make sense to people? Yeah, so it's about thinking forward and thinking positively about what you can and can't do. I mean, there's a lot of things I'm specifically doing now myself to manage anxiety, and probably the biggest thing I'm doing is managing my social media and information intake. And you know, that's purely down to the fact that there's so much stuff out there on social media about what may or may not be happening. All that's going to do is just create anxiety and influence this feeling that I can't control things. So sometimes it's best not to know things. Or if you hear about something on social media, is actually then just try and find out what the actual facts are. So two best websites at this point in time probably are gov.uk, which has got all the latest updates on COVID-19, both from a personal point of view, from an employment point of view, and also the NHS website. So get the facts rather than rely on gossip. And then the other thing, just in terms of generally, if you're feeling generally anxious about life, is actually just take the opportunity now. I think with us working from home and or being on furlough, we've got an opportunity we've never had before in our lives to actually do things we enjoy. Okay, keep our minds active, relax a little bit more. I mean, I think this situation is wonderful for me personally. Normally, I have an hour and a half commute to Sheffield in the morning and in the afternoon. So I'm using half an hour of that commute time for extra time in bed. Brilliant, cup of tea, have a look at the news. And then the other hour of that I would be spending commute, I go out, walk the dog, or go for a run. And we do know that, you know, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling worried, one of the best antidotes is regular exercise, even a brisk walk, because exercise stimulates the relief of feel-good hormones in the body, which enhance your mood. If you're doing it outside, particularly on a beautiful day like today, we know being outdoors helps to stimulate hormones that will elevate mood as well. So we've all got a lot more opportunity to actually manage our anxiety levels a lot better than before this situation began, ironically.
I think you're right as well in terms of you mentioned about the communication intake. So the media outlets out there through social media, etc. We've all done it in this call where we've scrolled down LinkedIn and all you see is negative, negative, negative.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, is that just somebody's opinion or is it a fact? And it's kind of getting the right facts to understand that opinion as such. And we've all done it where and also the information that is out there, the actual factual information, is getting diluted by all the, without sounding blunt, crap really that's getting posted out there that people are indulging in when they probably don't need to.
I think what each of us individually can do, we can choose to ignore that, or if you are heavily involved in social media, is actually just take a bit of thought if you're going to post anything and post as much positive stuff as you can. Not unrealistic, but post positive, realistic stuff. Yeah,
definitely. And I know all three chambers, us, Sheffield and Doncaster, have actually got sections on their website which is the factual information around the business support for COVID-19, rather than just diluting it with everything else that's going off. We've got specific areas for businesses to do. Very important. You guys also send your weekly newsletters out, which has got the right factual information on. So we probably need to spend a little bit less time scrolling down all the rubbish that's on social media to actually get to the facts that we want, really.
Yeah. And I think when you've got organisations like the Chamber, like the Westfield, where you know that the Chamber is providing you with a very reliable, up-to-date source of the facts, then actually what that allows us all as individuals to do is say, well, listen, rather than me just checking social media each day, I'm just going to make sure I read the Chamber's weekly notes. And then I know exactly where I should be and I've got exactly the facts to hand.
Brilliant. Great plug that for us, Richard. Thank you. I'm joking.
Oh no, I think one of the huge benefits of chamber type organisations, and there are other associations that I'm working with as well outside there for different industries and things. It's these types of situations that actually these organisations and associations were born for. We just didn't realise it at the time, but this is where the Chamber can have a huge amount of impact within the communities it serves in terms of supporting those communities with the right information and trusted, reliable information. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Before I move on to the next question, which is coming back to the staff morale really, but it's kind of homing in a little bit more on that. Deborah, you've raised your hand. Do you want to just come in there?
Yeah, it was just on what was just being said about, prioritizing which things we pay attention to on Facebook. I might have been the last person to discover this, but in case I'm not, we can set things on Facebook so that we prioritize certain posts. So we can set it so that if Westfield post up their update on Facebook, it always comes as the first thing on our feed. And then the priority things on our feed are the things that we want to trust and believe in, like the Chamber and Westfield. So if that helps anybody.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. Thank you.
That's a really good technical point, actually. Yeah.
So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to come back ever so slightly, but it's a twist on what we've been talking about, really. So in terms of staff morale and how this pandemic's affecting employee morale, in your opinion, Richard, there's a lot of staff who are on furlough, who aren't on furlough within organisations, who will have very different mixed emotions. Can you kind of go through and explain around how this might be affecting employees in different ways? I know we've touched on it ever so slightly. I just kind of want to, but it's going to lead on to a next question, really.
Okay, I mean, if you think about, go back to that first point, if we break it down, sort of those on furlough, those working from home, and key workers, which I define as those in the workplace, they're all going to have different concerns. So if you're a key worker and you're having to go to work at the moment, there's an awful lot of challenges you face in terms of anxiety, uncertainty, not just about the risks you might face at work, but perhaps even more probably stressful is the actual how you get to work, especially if you haven't got private transport. So again, as employers, we've got to look at how do we support those people to manage those anxiety levels down, but not just at work, but also, you know, a duty of care of how we support people getting to work in the least stressful way possible. If you look at people that are on furlough, you know, again, we just got to be careful here and not assume the negative. There'll be an awful lot of people on furlough that are quite rightly, and I know one of my management teams adopted this approach of, this is brilliant. I'll never again have this opportunity where I can just spend time at home with the family, do whatever I want to do because I'm not allowed to work. I'm still getting paid. This is marvelous. You know, and I think we should actually be encouraging those people on furlough to start to adopt that more positive attitude about, look, just seize the moment, take this opportunity that you've been given because you're never going to get a sabbatical again, especially paid. But there are others that are on furlough that will be feeling very isolated, particularly if they're living on alone, will feel that their purpose in life has been lost, because we do know that work is really, really important for a lot of people in terms of what it means to what their life's about, what they're about. So we've got to look at, from a sort of mental health perspective, how we keep supporting and encouraging that group of people. So it's been perhaps a little bit more sophisticated in terms of understanding individuals within our teams and the situation they're in and how they are reacting individually, rather than just assuming because that group are in this situation, we naturally think they must all be feeling a certain way. And then the other thing that we've got to be very, very cognizant about is those people that are working from home, is what a lot of people find a great challenge when they're working from home, particularly in the early days. I mean, it's probably people starting to get used to it now, is actually having a schedule for your day. So when we go to work, we tend to have a very neat structure. We arrive at a certain time, we have breaks at certain times, we leave at a certain time. When we're at home, that all goes out the window. And we've got to be disciplined in terms of actually pacing our day, making sure we get proper recovery breaks during the day. And don't feel guilty about, look, if it's a lovely day like today, you've got a garden, why not have a 15-minute break that you'd normally spend in the canteen at work, just out in the garden enjoying life? Yeah. But I think what's key there is a lot of people will need to be given psychological permission from their leaders that, listen, you can start to do things differently now. You can start to feel differently about things now that are more positive.
Thank you, Richard. And we're talking a lot here about kind of businesses with premises, with staff. I want to be very mindful of actually people who are sole traders, a single person business, but also they've not necessarily got family at home who they can bounce ideas off. Can you give any tips around that area? Because I think looking at who's in the group, I think there is a couple of people in the group who can relate to that a little bit, who have a who is their business is them, and also
Yeah.
they've not necessarily got family at home that they can talk to or bounce ideas off, so they might feel a little bit more isolated than others. Can you touch on that ever so slightly?
Yeah, I mean, I at one time in my life, I started up and ran my own business, and if you can't actually do X, Y, and Z, then there's no business. It's as simple as that. And you've got to find ways of being able to deliver that if you can. Now, humans, we're social animals, so we don't do isolation very well. We don't do movement restrictions very well either. Now, part of that has started to loosen up now. So for those of us that are on our own, running our own businesses, living alone, we've got more opportunity now to actually get out and about, which is good. So we've got to take that opportunity. We need to look at how we sort of more creatively interact with our friends and family. Now, obviously, we can't necessarily go and physically see people, but we can purposely try and schedule into our week or into our day times when we actually make contact with people. So it might just need a little bit more thought process to get in terms of how we structure our day, how we structure our weeks, so we actually almost build into our diaries time to spend communicating with others if that's important to us.
Yeah,
is that part of the answer?
Yeah, definitely. I just think it's very relevant, really, in terms of the chamber audience. We do have businesses who've got premises, who've got staff, but we also do work with a lot of sole traders, and some of those sole traders will be very isolated because, unfortunately, they've not necessarily got family at home to talk to. So I just wanted to pick up on that and touch on that. So this is open to the group now, really, in terms of, we've talked about morale, staff, we've talked about emotions. So is there anyone in the group who is doing things to help keep staff morale high? And I know some people are doing team meetings, but including fun games like quizzes, fancy dress, etc. For example, I know there's a chamber member on a Friday afternoon who does a pub chat with their staff, and because they normally go to the pub at the end of the Friday to finish off the week all together, and now they're doing it over Zoom. And I'm not encouraging drinking on a health and wellbeing webinar by any stretch, but I think it's that social interaction that people are missing. So is anyone doing anything in terms of something a little bit different? We're all doing team meetings and things like that, but is anyone doing a little bit different and you've seen a boost in staff morale? No? No, just us then. So we're doing different areas, really. So there we go, Claire. Virtual bingo worked well. Claire, would you mind if we unmuted you and you can just talk to us if you're confident enough just to do that? Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Over to you.
Hi, we've tried to sort of implement a few things. So yes, obviously the team meetings for work, and obviously updating how we are as a business. But yeah, we were very mindful of the social aspect as well. So we have done a few drinks over a Zoom call, but we've done the quizzes. But it's trying to find things that are a little bit different, so we're not getting too repetitive. And obviously something that's going to appeal to everybody. So we did put a little questionnaire out asking what people would like to, like us to do. And the virtual bingo was great because you had your cards online and you could just cross them off virtually. And we gave some little prizes and what have you. We've asked, sort of given team challenges as well, which has worked quite well. So something to work towards. So growing a sunflower and measuring it and seeing how people are coming along. Video challenges, so just little things that feel like people are still socializing and still having a bit of fun with each other. Brilliant,
thanks Claire. I think it's important that we are doing things a little bit different and not just sticking to the same old, even though when I say the same old, the same old's only been for 2 months, but it still gets repetitive really. Natalie's put in there from Proactive, there's Proactive do Irish bingo, and they also do a Friday afternoon quiz as usual, and they see each other every day on Teams too. And as a chamber, we have team meetings, we have management calls, we do different things. We've got different channels on Microsoft Teams as well, where people can put fun stuff to kind of keep that social element going. Just before that, and I'm kind of going off a little bit here, but Amanda's popped in there in the chat function. Are there any tips, Richard, around financial well-being?
Tips in what respect?
I'm not sure. Should we, Amanda, do you mind if we unmute?
Do you want me to just jump in here? Just because I did share, I did introduce Amanda in the chat to Jenny. We've got Jenny on the call, Jenny Wright from the Money and Pensions Service. Jenny was on our health and wellbeing webinar with, I know Richard, you weren't on that one, were you? But on a health and wellbeing webinar with Sheffield Chamber. So I don't know if you just want to just do a quick 30-second pitch, Jenny, and then if there's any questions after, we can go back to Amanda.
Yeah, thanks. So I've got loads of free tools and resources that are available for you to use with yourselves and your staff. Everything's free. It's all government backed. I work for an agency that is an arm's length body of the government. So we're here to deliver all trusted source materials. We've got some really good budgeting tools that people might find useful, especially if they're on furlough with a reduced budget. Things to think about, switching utility bills, etc., because you've got time to do it now. So I've got loads of links. I'm on LinkedIn, but I think I've shared my email with Amanda anyway. But if you want some more information, then please do get in touch with me, because I've got loads of stuff for you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you very much. Amanda, do you want to just touch on the area that you mentioned, or is that okay? I'll unmute. There you go.
Am I unmuted? Yeah.
You are, yeah.
So yeah, I work with a lot of businesses around health and well-being, and one of the specific anxieties that people have got is around financial issues, and you know, some of them are in the short term. It's about that uncertainty. But I just wondered what any specific things that you might have seen, or any things that you're advising employers to do around supporting people that have got issues around wellbeing, which are specifically related to financial concerns about, you know, the future, whether that's immediate or a bit longer term.
Yeah, so we did a piece on the Sheffield Chamber webinar about this, but I think it's really important for employers to acknowledge that there are going to be issues for their staff, and to have the right signpost in there for them. So we have got web chat, phone lines that are manned, you know, long hours for people just to have conversations around the finances and being put in the right place and talking to the right people. And I can share all those links with you, which you could send out if you're sending out staff newsletters. But really, if you want to talk to me about that offline, I can give you loads of stuff, and I'm happy to do that with anybody.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. So, guys, we have been an hour actually, and the time has flown. I've still got about 50 questions for you, Richard. Unfortunately, we're not going to get through them all. But I am very aware that people will have other things on this morning, especially with it being a Monday morning as well. And we've been just over an hour. So I'm just going to close it there. What I will do is follow up with an email to all participants, and I'll actually put Richard's details and Bethany's details on there from Westfield Health. So if we've got any burning questions that unfortunately you've not managed to ask during this webinar, then you can ask them direct to Richard and Bethany, and the team will come back to you. Would that be all right, Richard?
Yeah, that's fine. And if you feel, if this feedback is, you want to carry the conversation on, if you want, we can always reconvene it with a part 2 if you want.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I'll gauge that off you guys as well in a follow-up email. Please just be honest on there and reply if you do want a part 2, so to speak. So what I want to say on behalf of Barnsley and Rotherham, Sheffield and Doncaster Chambers of Commerce is thank you very much this morning for taking the time out of your Monday morning to join us for this webinar. This has launched Mental Health Awareness Week, which is very, very important, and each chamber are doing a number of things throughout this week through Zoom and through different webinar formats to work with people and our members and support them through this week on certain topics. So we'll also put links on the follow-up email on there, so you can actually book onto the webinars that are taking place this week as well. So once again, on behalf of Barnsley, Rotherham, Sheffield and Doncaster, thank you very much for this morning. Particular thank you to Richard and Bethany at Westfield Health, And thank you for engaging. I wasn't aware that we were all going to engage so well. So that's why I planned about 100 questions, just to make sure we had a lot of questions. So thank you very much, everybody. Please take care and have a fantastic week. Thank you very much.